reading things. Now we are going to check out this book, Conspiracies, and we are going to talk about this piece of reading, Mind Control, MKULTRA. Let's start. A powerful hallucinogen. How do you pronounce this? Give me a second. Hallucinogen. Hallucinogen. A powerful hallucinogen, LSD, was given to subjects of the MKULTRA program for prolonged periods, sometimes causing permanent mental damage. Here you have a picture of LSD. So, one of the most bizarre and disturbing conspiracies of all times was Project MKULTRA. This was a secret name for a series of CIA experiments that took place from the 1950s to the 1970s, which were designed to explore the possibilities of mind control through the use of drugs such as LSD and mescaline. In these experiments, subjects were given mind altering drugs, often without their prior knowledge, and their subsequent behavior was then studied. In several cases, the experiments resulted in the death of one or another of the participants, and there were many instances of severe, permanently damaging mental illness. However, the CIA continued to conduct the trials until the project was finally exposed. Ultimately, very little useful information about mind control resulted from MKULTRA, and it seems that sadism or sadism. Let me take a quick break here. Sadism. Okay, ultimately, very little useful information about mind control resulted from MKULTRA, and it seems that sadism, rather than serious scientific inquiry, was the driving force behind some of the experiments. Inquiry, okay, again, and it seems that sadism, rather than serious scientific inquiry, was the driving force behind some of the experiments. Here we have a picture of a man. It says here, head of the CIA, Alan Dulles, set up the MKULTRA project in 1953. There you go. This is the guy. Now, truth drugs. Let's give it a read. MKULTRA was set up by Alan Dulles, head of the CIA, in 1953, in order to look into the use of mind control techniques. The project was led by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. Ethan McGuire. Hi, nice. Hi, Ethan. The project was led by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, and early research was directed towards trying to find a truth drug for use in the interrogation of Russian spies. That's how you pronounce it, spies. Let me take a quick look. Spies, yeah, it's good. The project was led by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, and early research was directed towards trying to find a truth drug for use in the interrogation of Russian spies. The project was wide-reaching, with over 100 research programs, many of which were secret, and experiments were conducted on army and other personnel without their knowledge. In the initial phase of the project, the effect of radiation on the human mind was the main focus of the research, but as time went on, interest began to center on the effect of psychotropic drugs, particularly LSD. As the programs proliferated, subjects began to be recruited from outside the Army and the CIA. Patients with mental illnesses, many of them with minor disorders such as mild depression and anxiety, prostitutes, and other types of individuals were often used as guinea pigs, guinea, guinea pigs. An undeniable element of torture crept into the experiments as Gottlieb began to tie his victims up in straitjackets after administering the drugs. They were often locked in rooms where they could see or hear nothing, or tape loops were played to them in an attempt to drive them mad. Gottlieb also ordered his subjects to be given enormous amounts of LSD. In one experiment, volunteers were given the drug for a period of over 2 months, causing many of them to suffer permanent mental damage. Here we have one of the straitjackets. Sidney Gottlieb tied up his subjects in straitjackets after testing drugs on them. Here, a straitjacket. There you go. Operation Midnight Climax. Operation Midnight Climax. As time went on, the MKULTRA research programs became ever more bizarre and unpleasant, but they yielded very little in the way of scientific results. One of the most infamous of the experiments was Operation Midnight Climax, in which Dr. George Hunter White recruited prostitutes from San Francisco. Hola Roberto, saludos, gracias Roberto. Prostitutes. The prostitutes were asked to administer LSD to their clients without the client's knowledge. The LSD was put into the victims' drinks, and CIA operatives monitored their behavior through two-way mirrors. No scientific benefits at all accrued from this experiment. The operatives were not trained scientists. And one can only assume that it was set up as a means of satisfying the prurient interests of those who devised it. However, it took more than a decade for this program to end. It was later revealed that Dr. Gottlieb's behavior as head of MKULTRA was also questionable. He was known to take large amounts of LSD himself, and he seemed obsessed with the drug, even though it began to emerge that it was of very little use as a mind control device. Subjects under the influence of the drug behaved erratically and, if anything, became less susceptible to interrogation than they had been without the drug. ELCW, nice. Now, dangerous treatments here, dangerous treatments. Undeterred by the fact that LSD seemed to be useless as a mind-controlling substance, the MKULTRA team went on to perform more and more dangerous experiments on their hapless victims. In some cases, they simultaneously drip-fed a mixture of amphetamines and barbiturates into their subjects, which resulted in extreme mental confusion and sometimes even death. In addition to the use of LSD, amphetamines, and barbiturates, let me see. Barbiturate. Again, let's do it again. In some cases, They simultaneously drip fed a mixture of amphetamines and barbiturates into their subjects, which resulted in extreme mental confusion and sometimes even death. In addition to the use of LSD, amphetamines, and barbiturates, the MKULTRA team experimented with other drugs such as heroin, mescaline, marijuana, and alcohol. Perhaps the worst abuses of all took place in Canada under the AGs. What's this? AGs? Ah, Aegis. Perhaps the worst abuses of all took place in Canada under the aegis of Dr. Ewan Cameron. Dr. Cameron had put forward a theory of psychic driving in which he claimed that the mind could be erased and then corrected through drugs and other therapies. He conducted experiments in Montreal over a period of almost a decade using a combination of electroconvulsive therapy and drugs, both administered at well above the normal levels. He regularly induced comas in his subjects, sometimes for months on end, while playing them tape loops, supposedly to correct their thinking. Not surprisingly, by the end of his treatment, many of his patients were mentally scared for life. Blowing the whistle. Now, to end this reading, blowing the whistle. We're reading Conspiracies. Blowing the whistle. It was not until 1974 that the project came under press scrutiny when an article in the New York Times reported on the CIA's history of experimentation on human beings for the purposes of mind control research. Several committees were set up to look into what happened, but they found that much of the evidence had gone missing. Many of MKULTRA's records had been destroyed in order to prevent the truth from ever coming out. Even so, there was enough information to show that the MKUltra project had been very extensive. Over 30 universities and other institutions had been involved, and many of the subjects had been completely unaware that they were being given drugs. Not only this, but the experiments were mostly completely pointless from a scientific point of view. It was also revealed that an army scientist, Frank Coulson, had been given LSD without his knowledge as part of an experiment and had later thrown himself out of a window and died. His family later alleged that he was murdered because he knew too much about the CIA's nefarious activities. Nefarious activities. Let me look it up. How can I pronounce this word? Nefarious. Nefarious. Okay, again. His family later alleged that he was murdered because he knew too much about the CIA's nefarious activities. There were also reports that a professional tennis player, Harold Plower, had died as a result of being given high doses of mescaline without his consent. Following these revelations, the United States Army was also investigated, and a number of shocking cases came to light in which subjects had been given drugs without their consent or knowledge as a part of so called experiments. Experiments. Am I pronouncing experiments correctly? Experiment. Experiments. Legislation was enacted to prevent such abuses occurring again, and compensation was paid to some of the victims. Nevertheless, the MKUltra project remains one of the most sinister and bizarre state conspiracies ever to have taken place in America, or perhaps everywhere, anywhere else. Here we have a CIA document supporting the use of LSD in the MKULTRA project. There's the letter. And with that, we have, I think, read enough about the mind control MKULTRA project. Now it's time to switch on to philosophy. And today we're going to read about Hans-Georg Gadamer. He says, history does not belong to us, but we belong to it. We're going to know a little bit about Hans Gadamer. This is the guy, Hans Gadamer. Okay. And he proposes this: history does not belong to us, but we belong to it. Okay. Gadamer is associated in particular with one form of philosophy, hermeneutics, derived from the Greek word hermeneu, meaning interpret. That is the study of how humans interpret the world. Gadamer studied philosophy under Martin Heidegger, who said that the task of philosophy is to interpret our existence. This interpretation is always a process of deepening our understanding by starting from what we already know. The process is similar to how we might interpret a poem. We start by reading it carefully in the light of our present understanding. If we come to a line that seems strange or particularly striking, we might need to reach for a deeper level of understanding. As we interpret individual lines, our sense of the poem as a whole might begin to change. And as our sense of the poem as a whole changes, so might our understanding of individual lines. This is known as the hermeneutic circle. Heidegger's approach to philosophy moved in this circular fashion. And this was the approach that Gadamer later explored in his book Truth and Method. Gadamer goes on to point out that our understanding is always from the point of view of a particular point in history. Our prejudices and beliefs, the kinds of questions that we think are worth asking, and the kinds of answers with which we are satisfied are all the product of our history. We cannot stand outside of history and culture, so we can never reach an absolutely objective perspective. But these prejudices should not be seen as a bad thing. They are, after all, our starting point, and our current understanding and sense of meaning are based upon these prejudices and biases. Even if it were possible to get rid of all our prejudices, we would not find that we would then see things clearly. Without any given framework for interpretation, we would not be able to see anything at all. Let me show you this map. First, I want you to take a look at this map here that explains the thought process of Gadamer, and I will read it out loud for you. It says, we understand the world through interpretation. We begin here. And then we go to, this always takes place within a particular historical era, which gives us particular prejudices and biases. And then we go to this next chart. It says here, we cannot understand things outside of these prejudices and biases. History does not belong to us, but we belong to it. And here's another picture that says, when viewing historical objects, we should not view time as a gulf to be bridged, says Gadamer. Its distance is filled with the continuity of tradition, which sheds light on our understanding. Now let's read Conversing with History. Conversing with History. Okay? Gadamer sees the process of understanding our lives and ourselves as similar to having a conversation with history. As we read historical texts that have existed for centuries, the differences in their traditions and assumptions reveal our own cultural norms and prejudices, leading us to broaden and deepen our understanding of our own lives in the present. For instance, if I pick up a book by Plato and read it carefully, I might find not only that I am deepening my understanding of Plato, but also that my own prejudices and biases become clear and perhaps begin to shift. Not only am I reading Plato, but Plato is reading me. Through this dialogue, or what Gadamer calls the fusion of horizons, my understanding of the world reaches a deeper, richer level. So that's why Hans-Georg Gadamer says, because an experience is itself within the whole of life is present in it too. Here's this quote. There you go. And some lines about Hans-Georg Gadamer life. Okay. It says Gadamer was born in Marburg in 1900, but grew up in Breslau, Germany, now Wrocław, Poland. He studied philosophy first in Breslau and then in Marburg, where he wrote a second doctoral dissertation under the tutelage of the philosopher Martin Heidegger, who was an enormous influence on his work. He became an associate professor at Marburg, beginning a long academic career which eventually included succeeding the philosopher Karl Jaspers as professor of philosophy in Heidelberg in 1949. His most important book, Truth and Method, was published when he was 60. It attacked the idea that science offered the only route to truth, and its publication brought him wider international fame. Sociable and lively man, Gadamer remained active right up until his death in Heidelberg at the age of 102. Wow. Key works: Truth and Method, Philosophical Hermeneutics, 1980, Dialogue and Dialectic, 1981, Reason in the Age of Science. So I will recommend you guys to take a look at this philosopher and especially search for some of his works because his ideas were quite interesting. So see you guys tomorrow for another English reading. I will be waiting for you guys right here in this spot. Goodbye. Thank you so much.